Welcome back, Music Maniacs, to another episode of Gibbs Drops the Needle, your one-stop spot for all things music. Got a little something different for you today. I've been wanting to do this episode for a while, just for something different, but other things have kind of creeped up, so we've been sticking with those. So, I had seen someone rank all the Pink Floyd albums as their favorites from least favorite to favorite, and naturally, with things like this being very subjective, I had my own ranking of my favorite Pink Floyd albums. So I want to get into that. This wasn't just something that I quickly did. I spent a little bit of time looking at each album and diving into them a little bit about which tracks they were. I used how many tracks there were on the album compared to how many tracks I liked, just so that I could come up with a percentage of the album that I liked, because obviously not all albums have the same amount of songs on them, so it was kind of hard to gauge that way. So I came up with a percentage of what percent of the album that I really enjoyed, and I kind of ranked them based off of that and put a little more weight on if I really liked these songs on this album compared to another one, because there were a couple that were close in the percentages that I liked the albums, but the songs on the album that maybe had 1 or 2% of the album less, I really liked more than the other songs on the other albums. So not that any of that matters to you, because again, this is all subjective and it's my biased opinion on this, but I just kind of wanted to clue you into what came through making this list. Now, I did just start an account on Music Board that helped me make this list and keep track of my rankings. So if you happen to be someone who downloads Music Board, which is a app for ranking and reviews, you can look up any song or album or artist and you can give a review of it, or you can create lists like I am creating with this one. So that's what I used to do this, and then I kept some notes about each album, and we'll go through the track listing of all the songs I like, but I have the top songs from each album as well. So starting, I have 16 albums by Pink Floyd. Now, there's really only 15 studio albums, but I did include Relics just because it had some studio recordings of songs that did not appear on other albums. So I went ahead and included Relics for those keeping track and big Pink Floyd fans that will say that there's only 15 albums. I did include Relics into this. So getting started with my number 16 album is More, which is an original film soundtrack. I looked through this listing of tracks and there wasn't one track on it that I really cared for or recognized. I did find throughout this list that a lot of earlier Pink Floyd may not have been my thing. I am a huge fan when it comes up to a certain point, and earlier Pink Floyd was kind of hit and miss for me, so this was one that was a miss. I looked through the track listing. There are 13 tracks on this album, and I didn't really care for any of them. So number 16 is More. The next album is the last technical album that came out from Pink Floyd, and this was an album that came after Richard Wright's death and was kind of just put together by different parts of songs that didn't end up being used in songs. And although I have listened to this whole album, because being a Pink Floyd fan, when I heard that they were coming out with a new album, I naturally wanted to go and listen to it. So I did listen to this album full length, but that was also back in 2014 when the album released. And looking back at it now, there was nothing really memorable from that album. I was looking through the whole track listing and kind of drawing a blank on this album. So it got ranked above More just because I have listened to this whole album, and it wasn't a bad album. I remember that it wasn't something that I hated every song. It was just more of there was nothing really memorable on this album. So it ends up at number 15. At 14 for me is what most consider Pink Floyd's weakest album, and that's Umaguma. And this was one that was kind of different for me in the fact that if you listen to the first disc of this album, it is live versions of songs that I like. And if you listen to the second disc of this album, it was all new material which I did not like. So this was kind of on the borderline for me between the albums that I had ranked where I didn't really care for or didn't remember any of the songs, and this one was on the borderline because if you count in that first disc of the live versions of these songs, I did end up liking 4 out of 16 of the tracks on this album, which is 25% of the album. But if you don't count in the live versions of these songs, then I liked 0% of this album. So that's why I put this one kind of on the borderline of the ones that I didn't really care for or remember the songs, so they were 0%, and this one was kind of on the borderline because if you count the live albums, then I did like some tracks, otherwise I did not. So my top track on Umaguma is Careful with That Axe, Eugene, which again is the live version of that song. That is my top track on that album, and again, 25% of the album if you count the live versions of these songs, 0% if you do not. The next album that I have ranked here at number 13 is Atom Heart Mother, and this is one where I like the title track, and that was about all that I consider memorable or good. So obviously Atom Heart Mother is my top track on this album. Only liking one song, that's a 1 out of the 5 tracks on this album, which makes it 20% of this album that I cared for. So again, I ranked it above Umaguma at the 25% just because of the live version situation. At number 12, I have Obscured by Clouds, which I did like the title track. My top song on this album is Mudman, and that puts me at liking 2 out of 10 on this album, which is also at 20% of this album. But I do like Mudman and Obscured by Clouds more than Atom Heart Mother, and with that being 2 tracks to the 1 track on the other album, it kind of carried some more weight there. The next album I have is A Saucer Full of Secrets. This is at number 11 on my list, and my top track on this album is Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. Other tracks I liked on this album was A Saucer Full of Secrets, the title track. That put me at liking 2 out of the 7 songs on this album, making it 29% of the album that I liked. Getting into the top 10 Pink Floyd albums, in my opinion, at 10 we have Piper at the Gates of Dawn. My top track on this album is Astronomy Domine. I like that track, and I also like Bike. That's always a fun one. This is the Syd Barrett album, so very early Pink Floyd, debut album by Pink Floyd, putting me at liking 2 out of 11 tracks on this album and 18% of the album. But again, these tracks I liked more than the other tracks on the albums below this, so they carried a little more weight. The percentage was close, so they carried a little more weight, and I left this one at 10. At 9 we have Relics, which I had mentioned technically isn't a studio album, but is an album all the same, and does have some tracks on it that don't appear on other albums, so I included it in this ranking. My top song on this album is Careful with That Axe, Eugene, which if you recall was my favorite on Umaguma. But that was the live version. This is the studio version of this song, so that was my favorite track on this album. Other tracks I liked on this album were See Emily Play, and Bike makes an appearance again on this album, so I did like that one as well, which put me at liking 3 out of 11 songs on this album, which is 27% of the album, placing it at number 9 on the list. At number 8 is A Momentary Lapse of Reason. This would be after the Roger Waters era, and my favorite song on this album was On the Turning Away. I also liked Learning to Fly and Sorrow on this album, and had this been the live version of Sorrow that is on the Pulse Live album, I probably would have said Sorrow is my favorite track on this album, just because the live version is so good. We talked about the reverb, the natural reverb of the arena that they were playing in just makes it sound so big, and that intro guitar part that's slower with the feedback just sounds spectacular. And had that been the live version on this album, then that would have been my favorite track, but this is the studio recording of that, which meant that On the Turning Away was my favorite studio recording on this album. So that put me at liking 3 out of 11 on this album at 27%, which again is the same as I had Relics, but the songs carried more weight because I like the songs more on A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Up at number 7 is the other post Roger Waters album at The Division Bell. My top song on this one is High Hopes, but honestly, on this album it could have been a number of tracks, because the tracks that I do like on this album are really strong tracks in my opinion. You have What Do You Want From Me, you have Coming Back to Life, which is another one that on the Pulse Live album just sounds great, just due to the slower intro and again the reverb of the arena just making the song really stand out in my opinion. So that was another one that, had we been talking about the live version, it maybe would have been the top song on this album. I also like Keep Talking, so there was quite a bit on this album that I liked, and again, the tracks that I do like on this album are really strong tracks in my opinion. It's just High Hopes is probably more of the prominent song on this album. I know it appears on many greatest hits albums for them, and I also like the slide guitar of it. It just has a very almost haunting sound to it, and I really enjoyed that track. At number 6, which might be a little controversial to everyone, because I know that this one is usually towards the bottom of a lot of people's list, but I really liked it, and that was The Final Cut, which is the last Roger Waters album. I believe Richard Wright was maybe fired for this album, so he didn't really contribute to this album. This album is kind of a follow-up to The Wall, which is, you'll find out where that one places later on in this list, but The Final Cut to me is a really good album. My top song is The Gunner's Dream on this album, but it could have easily been Possible Past, just because I really love the guitar solo in Possible Past. The Gunner's Dream has a really good saxophone solo that I like, that Roger Waters' vocals kind of bleed into the saxophone solo, so I really like that track, but again, could have easily been Possible Past just because of the guitar solo alone. I like 9 out of 13 tracks on this album. To me, there was a lot of good albums. I like The Post-War Dream, Your Possible Past, which I talked about the guitar solo on that one. One of the Few is kind of a short track, but it's a good track in my opinion. Again, going back to a little bit of a haunting sound with that one. When the Tigers Broke Free, I like that track. It appears in the movie The Wall at the intro, so I was familiar with that track. I like The Gunner's Dream, as I mentioned. That's my favorite track. Paranoid Eyes is a good one. The Fletcher Memorial Home is probably one of the standouts of this album. Not Now John is another good one that features David Gilmour's vocals on that track. So I ended up liking 9 out of 13 tracks on that album, putting it at 69% of the album that I liked. So that puts it at the number 6 position. Now we're getting into the top 5, in my opinion, which are going to be where the heavy hitters that a lot of people know and think about when they think of Pink Floyd. Starting with number 5, you have Metal, which is just a great album in my opinion. My top track on this album is Echoes, which is basically the whole B-side of this album, and it's just a strong showing from them, and I think that they find their more modern sound on this album, and especially with Echoes you get a lot of leadway into what they would eventually turn into. But so many strong tracks on this album as well. One of These Days being more of an instrumental piece featuring a very short Nick Mason vocal part in there. And Fearless is another one that I really like. That's something that I play out when I'm playing acoustic. A lot of people don't like Seamus, but I love Seamus. The fact that they were literally able to hold a microphone up to a dog and let it howl while they played this song, and that's a big part of this song. I think that that's so cool, and a lot of times I feel like Pink Floyd just found ways to make songs more interesting by adding little sound bites in like that. But so cool how they went about that and really recorded the dog doing that part. And again, Echoes is my top track on this album. That put me at 4 out of 6 on this album, so 67%, so a little less than the final cut, but again, the songs on this album just carried more weight in my opinion. You have iconic tracks on this album. On the final cut, I believe really the only track on that album that makes an appearance on any greatest hits or anything is the track The Fletcher Memorial Home. And this one, you always have One of These Days. It's a popular one in Echoes, plus you add in the few others that I really liked, and that moved Metal up. So now we get into what is considered Pink Floyd's Big Four. And this is a stretch of The Dark Side, Wish You Were Here, Animals, and The Wall. And this is my top 4, obviously. Considered their 4 biggest albums, it makes it into my top 4 as well. So starting at number 4, we have Animals, which my top song on this one is Pig's Three Different Ones. It's something that, if you recall when we talked about Peter Frampton, I really like the talk box, and this song features that, and I really like the guitar solo. I really think that, in my opinion, this is one of Roger Waters' better bass parts is in Pig's Three Different Ones, so I really like that as well. And just the relevance that this song still has today. It's something that Roger Waters still performs live and makes work into things going on today on the political landscape. So a big song that still holds a lot of weight. And this is an album that I like all the songs on it. There's not one that I skip if I'm listening to the full album. You have Pigs on the Wing Part 1, which is a short song. You have Dogs. You have Pigs Three Different Ones. You have Sheep. And then you have Pigs on the Wing Part 2, which I believe I have listened to. Pink Floyd just came out with, I think a couple weeks ago, they came out with a album, and it was called 8 Tracks. And for the most part, it was a greatest hits album that had just probably, I think, 5 or so songs on it. But the big draw to this album was that it included Pigs on the Wing Part 1 and Part 2 together, and had a linking guitar solo in the middle of it. So if you're a fan of Animals and you haven't heard that yet, that's definitely something to go listen to because that's really cool. So again, I liked 100% of this album. At number 3, and here's where I might lose some people because this is regarded as number 1 on almost every Pink Floyd list, and that's The Dark Side of the Moon. So I know that this is commercially their best success, and again, you have great songs on this album, songs that appear on every greatest hits album, songs that David Gilmour and Roger Waters are still playing today when they do go out and play live. So I understand the impact of this album, and I understand that this album still sells millions of copies a year. I mean, this is one of the highest selling albums of all time. So I understand that completely. This is my personal list. This is my way of looking at it, and when it came down to these albums, this one had a few things that I could knock on it. Not very many. This is a near perfect album in my opinion, and my favorite track on this album is Time. Just a great song, great guitar solo, very iconic guitar solo. And again, you get into them really starting to use sound bites and stuff in this album. You have the different vocal parts that were sit-down interviews that basically Roger Waters sat down with just people in the studio or anything and just asked them all these pre-planned questions and then made sound bites out of their responses, and that's what you get sprinkled throughout this album whenever there's a vocal part that is just a speaking part. And that's really cool that they were able to do that and make it fit in with these albums, and you get a real genuine response from these people that probably didn't know at the time that they were going to make this album. It was just something that Roger Waters was doing on the side here, and then it gets sprinkled in throughout the albums, and a lot of these things are just genuine answers and became such iconic pieces of this album. I know I mentioned Time is my favorite track on this album. It was something that they didn't have computers back then that had alarm clock sounds or clock sounds on it. So they said they literally put all these clocks in the studio and ran around and had to get the timing right onto when to set them off for the intros. So just a lot of work went into creating this album, and just the tricks and stuff that they had to use at that time because the technology wasn't there really shows the great thought and everything put behind this album. Another track that could have easily been my favorite is Money. I like the odd time signature of it. I like that it changes time signatures. They said David Gilmour was having trouble creating a solo in 7/8 times, so they had to do the little drum fill and kick into a 4/4 so he could solo throughout that. It's got a good saxophone solo in it, which you'll learn about me. I love saxophone solos. Just a real strong album. You get so many tracks. Speak to Me is kind of the intro to the album, more of a mashup of all those audio clips that you're going to be hearing throughout the album that lead into Breathe in the Air, which is just a beautiful song. On the Run is something that they created with a sequencer, so you basically type in the notes into this board and you're able to slow it down and speed it up. And I remember it might have been the Live at Pompeii that you can see Roger Waters basically starting to create On the Run because he's playing with that sequencer. You got Time, which again I already went into, my favorite track on this album. The Great Gig in the Sky, which was something that again is more of a vocal improv. They came up with the music to it. got a female vocalist in there to basically improv over top of this thing. And it was said that when she left out of the studio, she was embarrassed by her performance on this, but Pink Floyd absolutely loved it, and it became one of the signature songs on this album. Money is a big hit. It might have been the first single released on this album, I believe. Us and Them is a beautiful piano part. I believe Richard Wright wrote it for maybe More. It was something that he had wrote, either More or Adam Hart Mother, that he had originally came up with this piano part for, and it got scrapped, and then during the making of this album it was able to come back up and turn into a really beautiful song. My one knock on this album, I don't really like Any Color You Like. That's the track on this album that I sometimes skip through, or most of the time skip through. Sometimes I skip through Speak to Me just because it's just a mashup of different audio clips. So there are a couple skippable songs on this album, which is my very nitpicky knock on this album and what makes it number 3. You round out this album with Brain Damage, which is again probably one of my favorite songs on this album. This album just has so many songs that I could consider my favorite songs. Brain Damage leads into Eclipse, which is the end of this album, which again is just this big song and big moment of the album to conclude the album. So again, only a couple knocks on this album, but they are knocks on this album. Dark Side of the Moon, I really like 9 out of the 10 songs on this album. Like I said, sometimes I'll skip Speak to Me, but most of the time I'll listen to that one. Any Color You Like is probably my only track on this album that I skip the majority of the time. So that put me at liking 90% of this album, which is why it ended up at number 3. Number 2 album is the album that followed Dark Side of the Moon, and that is Wish You Were Here. This, to me, is one of those perfect albums that from start to finish you can listen to this thing and it's just hit after hit after hit, in my opinion. My top song on this album is probably Welcome to the Machine. If I had to pick one, there's so many good ones on this album that it was honestly hard for me to pick a top, but I really like Welcome to the Machine. I really like covers that have been done of Welcome to the Machine. Shadows Fall did a cover that I really like. Queensryche has done a cover I really like. Obviously, the Pink Floyd version is a favorite of mine. So you start out this album with Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which is just a great intro to an album. You get that subtle keyboard part that Richard Wright is playing in the beginning of it, and then you get into a light David Gilmour solo followed by that eerie main riff of the song. You have so many good guitar solos and guitar moments in this song. Lyrically, it's very strong. You have a saxophone solo. I mean, this song has everything that I would view as things that I would want in a song. Then next up, you have Welcome to the Machine, which I went through as my top song on this album. Another one that could have easily been a top song on this album is Have a Cigar. It again has just a interesting guitar riff in it and guitar solo that's really strong. The title track, Wish You Were Here, is just one of those iconic tracks. The opening guitar riff is an iconic riff that a lot of times you'll walk into a Guitar Center or something and hear that riff being played. I'm sure it's one of those taboo ones that you're not allowed to play in a Guitar Center, but you still hear it throughout there a lot. Just great guitar solos again throughout that track. You have David Gilmour's high voice matching the guitar solo at one point, which just sounds awesome, and is great musicianship on his part. Then you round out the album with Shine On You Crazy Diamond Part 6 through 9, which is a track that I like, but if I had to be honest about it, this is one sometimes that I don't really finish the whole track, just kind of stop at Wish You Were Here at times. So even though I do like the track, it's not something I always listen to. So that puts me at 5 out of 5 on this, which is 100% of the album, making it number 2 on my list. Meaning that the number 1 album, in my opinion, and if you know me personally, you would have known this was coming anyway when I started this list. It's The Wall by Pink Floyd. This is an album that I absolutely love. It was an album that I discovered in high school. My sister had me watch the movie actually first before I had really listened to the album. And it was just something that I could really connect to in ways that building up of the wall so that, you know, you kind of protect yourself and then you put yourself behind that wall and shield yourselves off from everything going on. And then eventually having to be exposed and tear down that wall and be exposed to, as they say in the trial, be exposed to your peers. And it was something that really resonated as a kid in high school, that, you know, you're always feeling judged, you're always feeling like people are looking at you in certain ways, and you're always worried about what people think, and should I dress a certain way, should I act a certain way, should I like certain things. And it just really resonated to me at the time, being in school. And the top track on this album is Comfortably Numb, in my opinion. This is something that is just a real connected point to me in this album, because a lot of the times, as someone that struggles with mental health issues, sometimes it is just this thought of wanting to become comfortably numb. So that was something that always resonated with me. The guitar solos are iconic. This is another one, I've brought it up multiple times, the Pulse Live album. That is probably my favorite iteration of Comfortably Numb's guitar solo, just because instead of fading out at the end, you get a conclusion to that guitar solo. And I've heard different versions of it live, but to me, David Gilmour was really on point for that recording of it, and it's just such an epic point in that album. And if you watch the live version of that concert, you see this lotus flower kind of thing that comes out of this giant disco ball in the ceiling, and it's just a beautiful epic moment of this concert, and just a beautiful song in general. I love it. This is an album to me that I could talk about probably all day. I have a wall tattoo on my arm. I have the Wall screaming face on the back of my truck. I mean, I'm almost obsessed to a weird point with this album when it comes to it. And this is one where I like every song on this album. It's something I can sit and listen to from start to finish multiple times, and have just went through and cycled it from start to beginning over and over again at times. So memorable tracks on this album. It's hard to go through and talk about all 26 tracks, but I mean, I can. In the Flesh is just a great opening to the album with the "Well, you thought you could go to the show." And for a while, when I was in a band coming out of high school, I would open our shows with that. We had a cover of it, and I would open my shows with it just because it seemed like such a cool way to draw people in. Cool guitar riff. Really liked the song, and just the build up at the end of all the sound effects and everything like that, leading into then a subtle baby cry that is the beginning of the Thin Ice, which is again just a beautiful song that leads into a more aggressive end and a really good guitar solo. Another Brick in the Wall Part 1, it just has that haunting kind of feel to it, with the main guitar riff and everything just staying kind of quiet and down low as you're getting that playground sound in the background with the overdubbed audio clips. Happiest Days of Our Lives is just a good start with the teacher picking on the students and really putting an emphasis on that, because I remember even as a student, I didn't get smacked or anything like that by my teachers, but you had certain teachers that would, as they say, hurt the children in any way they could. And whether it was intentional or not, it happened. And I remember I had a couple teachers that openly made fun of me in school. And it's rough when you think that your classmates are thinking that way, but then when your teacher is saying it out loud, it makes it even worse. So, again, making this album even more relatable in my eyes. And that leads into Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, which iconic song from this album, arguably one of the favorites from this album. I tried to get it to be our class song, it got voted down. But iconic guitar part, and I always joke because my wife is a vegetarian, and I always joke with her because at the end of it it'll say, how can you have any pudding if you don't eat your meat? So I always joke with my wife that she can't have any pudding. Next up, Mother, another beautiful song. It's one that I cover when I'm playing out acoustically. Goodbye Blue Sky, Empty Spaces, Young Lust. I do like in the live versions of this you get The Last Few Bricks, and I do like that song. It's in the movie as well. It doesn't make an appearance on the album, but One of My Turns was always a good one. Don't Leave Me Now, Another Brick in the Wall Part 3, Goodbye Cruel World, Hey You. Is There Anybody Out There is another guitar interlude that I would sometimes start my shows with just to lead into another song. I thought it was a very pretty guitar part. Nobody Home, Vera, Bring the Boys Back Home. Then you have, of course, the iconic Comfortably Numb, The Show Must Go On, In the Flesh, Run Like Hell, Waiting for the Worms, Stop. Stop is a very short track. It's only 31 seconds long, but lyrically, again, Roger Waters was such a great lyricist, and that you can find throughout my whole top 4 on these albums. It's just, he was such a great lyricist and had a way of putting things that was so nice. Then you have the very climactic ending of The Trial, and again tearing down that wall and being exposed to your peers. And then as the album ends, you have the wall being torn down, and then you have this very quiet Outside the Wall track that just ends the album perfectly, I feel. So that's my number 1 album. I'm sure that will be controversial to some Pink Floyd fans out there, but again, like I've said multiple times, this is all subjective, and I'm sure everyone has their different top albums out there. But again, I want to mention I did use this music board thing, and I'm very new to it, but looked like you can do song reviews, album reviews, things like that. So that might be something that I dabble in when it comes to that. So if you happen to have that app and want to give me a follow, again, it's Gibbs Drops the Needle. You can look at my full list over there. Right now, the only list I got on there is this one, but it's something that I might continue to do. I have a lot of artists out there that I like a lot of their discography, so I might end up doing this with multiple bands if it's something that you guys enjoy and want to know more about. I kind of liked being able to dive into all these albums and the songs and share little things that I have learned about them on the way. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I would appreciate if you give a like, follow, subscribe, all the good things that help me out and help this channel grow. That's all I got for you this time. Until next time, stay safe and be kind.